The Belonger, a novel, written by Kathleen Mehuron, and narrated by Kathleen Hewitt. For all my friends on Grand Turk Island, Turks and Caicos, in the British West Indies, a magical land of beautiful, formidable women and idiosyncratic, fascinating men, this is my love letter to all of you. You never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. Bob Marley. Chapter 1. Holly put both her hands flat on the deep sill of the hinged window of her bedroom and leaned out to see the morning light. Then she pulled on shorts and a t-shirt over her head. Flip-flops and bare feet were a common option, but this morning, like most mornings, in the early hours when it was cool, she put on a pair of sneakers so she could walk along the entire length of the seawall before the sun rose too high in the sky. The top of the wall was as wide as a sidewalk and had the most beautiful ocean view she'd ever seen. At points along the way, the waves crashed spectacularly upon the cement pilings before taking a back dive toward the Caribbean. Each big surge made a great brumph-fash sound that made her heart feel light. Holly loved how the locals smiled their hello as she jogged by, how in the grocery store, shoppers often burst out singing together when a favorite song came on the radio, broadcast by the shop's sound system, how music seemed to be everywhere, as constant as the competing crash of the waves. She wanted all of her guests to enjoy the island the way she did. She counseled her visitors that climbing up to the top of the wall at the start of the walk was a bit of a challenge, as was jumping down when they reached the far end. She also told them, "Don't try it if you mind getting sea foam in your hair." After her exercise, like most locals, Holly used the cool mornings for physical work, as the salt air and seasonal storms created a never-ending array of maintenance projects. On the extensive fencing, for example, which was needed to keep the wild donkeys, horses, and dogs out, a fresh coat of paint was always wanted. When she got back from her run, she painted a section white. Then she dropped the brush in a bucket of water to soak. Anyone with any sense at all went inside or found a spot in the shade by mid-morning. Holly sat in her favorite place under an enormous lignum vitae, sometimes called a tree of life. It draped over one ocean-facing corner of her deep, stuccoed front porch. A high, thick, white limestone wall that was plastered to match the main house snugly fenced her small yard off from the street. On its opposite ends, two bright blue wooden gates rattled with each strong gust of the trade breeze. The roof of the porch blocked the morning sun as it rose from behind her. The high wall in front would soon provide her some protection from the hottest rays when her work hours eased into the late afternoon. Holly kept a small table and chair in the spot under the cascading tree. It was there she now worked, hunched over her computer in the heat of the day, lost in the details of the orders she was placing, her troubles far, far away. The restaurant needed new cloth napkins. She wondered about color and the quality of the fabric. This time, should I find a product with some texture? White is classic, but maybe it's time for a change. It was the details that absorbed her imagination, the joy of creating something new. A cruise ship was in port for a few hours, and one of their trolley-shaped buses rolled slowly by, with its loudspeaker blaring. Though Grand Turk Island is the capital city of the Turks and Caicos, it has remained the quiet coastal village you see today. To your right is the historic Roseate House, built in 1832. Though built as a family home, it's now a popular inn. Holly shifted in her seat and acknowledged the mention of her business by waving to the bus. Many others in town complained about the almost daily invasion of tourists. But Holly's response to that was, "It's good for business, and they're gone by 3 in the afternoon. Not exactly a bother." The temporary influx of Americans soothed her, too, as she was one of the very few who lived on Grand Turk Island. This was a particularly large bus group. She stood up for a minute and peered across the street to make sure her head chef, Samira, was opening the restaurant. The kitchen was wide open. She let out an assured sigh. Business will be good today. She sat down and allowed her attention to return to her computer's screen. As the tour director squawked, his voice brought her back to the real world again. Across the road is a beach restaurant called the Sand Dollar, which was converted from an old garage. A beach bistro with signature cocktails. It's known in town as a fun place to hang out. And please notice the architecture of the inn, which was built in the British colonial Bermudan style. She tried to push the sound away, return to her work, but she found she was marveling about how many centuries had passed since this town was built. She never ceased to be amazed that so many of the old homes on Duke and Front Streets had survived, despite their low-lying coastal location. Much of the island had to be fixed or rebuilt every decade or two as a result of a direct hit from a major hurricane, yet the oceanfront road remained largely intact. With the exception of her fingers clicking on the keys, she sat almost frozen for a long time. Holly was used to hard work. In the early afternoon, she got up and briefly went across the street to ask for a sandwich, then took it back to eat at her desk while she worked. For only a few minutes at a time that afternoon did she jump up and run into the office to sharpen her pencil, grab her notebook, or pour a glass of water, and each time she was back on task quickly. By the time she was answering emails, her shoulders and neck were beginning to ache. She finally stood to stretch, staring out across her yard toward the sharp, deep blue line of the coral reef. In stark contrast to the turquoise water, the sharp drop-off of the wall was a kilometer from shore. Day is nearly over, Holly thought. Why does it always make me feel so melancholy? The sun had fallen away from the peak of its arc and was inching closer to the western horizon. It seemed oddly quiet with the cruise guests gone. Resigned that the hours were gathering toward nightfall, she picked up her paperwork and laptop and went inside to shower. Since Holly had come to live permanently on island, she'd ceased to see any point in trying to do her hair. The high humidity of the Caribbean air and the constant winds made her various attempts at styling irrelevant. Following her shower, she simply ran a wide-tooth comb through her wet tresses and let them air dry. To dress for the evening, she reached for one of her cotton sundresses, all of which were organized by color on their hangers. Because of her fair coloring, saleswomen tended to steer her toward pale shades of pink and blue. But there was that pastel green outfit, too. I'm not convinced about the green. I shouldn't have let her talk me into that. She pulled one of the pink dresses over her head and looked into her bedroom mirror. I suppose I should make more of an effort, but do I even know how? She twisted her hair up and held it back with both hands as she looked into the mirror. Maybe I'll fuss with it after it dries. She shook her head and snorted. Who am I kidding? Once I set foot in the restaurant, I won't have time to think about how I look. Over time, Holly had also accepted that makeup wouldn't stand up to Grand Turk's climate either. You can always tell a woman is a tourist here by her melting mascara and eyeliner. Locals did occasionally get done up for a special event, but it was rare. Most women on island presented faces that were scrubbed clean, with only a natural glow from the sun to enhance their looks. The benefit, as Holly saw it, was that this lack of pretense made dressing for dinner easy. By this time of late afternoon, when the day surrendered to dusk, whole families positioned themselves to watch the sun go down. A keen observer of the island would take note of the extreme lengths each household went to in order to create an outdoor space for the ceremony of night's onset. like something holy. Everyone in Cockburn Town seemed to be pulled out of their doorways to stare at the horizon and bear witness to another end-of-the-day miracle. And Holly was no different from her neighbors. The sunset was always beautiful, but there were also exceptional nights when the colors in the sky could leave you breathless. Sometimes those nights made her feel joyful. Sometimes, when the tall clouds were rushing across the huge expanse of sky, she felt small and alone. Air pollution was nearly non-existent on Grand Turk, so there was usually a clear, unobstructed view across the distance. One of the reasons the island had the occasional green flash when the sun set. All that witnessed it were inevitably awestruck. More than once, Holly had scanned the faces of friends at such a moment, illuminated by the flattering light, expressions slack-jawed to the point of striking her as comical. In those moments, she knew they must feel the way she did, blessed by the divine. She recalled that the great author Jules Verne had written about such an event. He'd said the color was a most wonderful green, a green which no artist could obtain on his palette, the true green of hope. The true green of hope. She let this sink in. The color of my hope for a fresh start here on Grand Turk. Her hope that the small community of expatriates from Britain and Canada might come to accept her, and that the belongers, who comprised the vast majority of the town, might give her a chance to prove herself. Though Byron's father's family was historically a pillar of the community, she worried they only politely tolerated her. As marginalized as she had been in Vermont, she prayed for something better in her new home on the island. I am just going to try to do the next right thing, and hope against hope they will warm to me. Though Verne's idea about the green flash was marvelous, Holly thought his bold sentiment didn't quite do the phenomenon justice. The few times she'd witnessed one, it had felt powerfully significant, like a portent, a harbinger of things to come. She held her breath until the last of the rays of the sun were swallowed by the ocean, and darkness took up its reign. Even then, she remained rooted as, one by one, the stars slowly popped out, and her eyes adjusted to the changing light. Wild donkeys were the only living creatures on Grand Turk that weren't watching the sunset in the precious waning moments at the end of the day. They had noticed long ago that the humans were distracted during this time, so for them it had become an opportunity to steal food off a picnic table or take a drink from their outdoor foot baths. She often heard people hissing, shouting, and clapping their hands to drive them off as the sky turned pink. She never bothered. She knew from experience the animals would eventually leave on their own, ambling away in their dallying fashion. Their loose hips rocked as they made their way up the hill with a punctuated clump, clump, clump to the lighthouse, where there were easier pickings. At the sound of their braying, Holly's stomach growled. Suddenly ravenous, she splayed the fingers of both hands across her tummy. What has Samira made for dinner tonight? Chapter 2. Holly would have done anything for her son. Given where she started her life, and her unexpected pregnancy, she had already moved heaven and earth to make something of herself. I did it for Byron, so he would have a better life than I had. Seeing how excited he was about the purchase of their inn and restaurant had left her with few qualms about moving from Vermont. Though she'd been giving up the only home she'd ever known, she knew her real home was wherever Byron was. Leaving her chosen career had proven more difficult to do. It had taken her 6 years to work her way through college and finally get her license as a school counselor. She'd done it so she could help teenagers who were having a difficult time of it, like she had, and it seemed she'd succeeded. At an assembly given to celebrate her retirement, she'd been gifted a decorative box filled with letters from students and former students, each one moving in its own way. She now started every day by opening the box and reading one of them. It had been meaningful work, but it was time to go. She separated her work life from her real life. Byron was her only family. She stood gazing over the counter of the bar at the Sand Dollar toward the ocean with a soft cloth in her hand. It was hard to believe, but here she was, not even a year after she and Byron had started talking about the purchase of the businesses. She was in Grand Turk, working at the restaurant. Polishing the silverware gave her a comforting feeling. She rubbed and rubbed the bowls of her spoons, where she'd found that moisture could sometimes pool and create a stain. It was a simple thing, but when these babies gleam, it makes me happy. Given the forecasted time of sunset and her view of the ocean, she knew a total and complete darkness would descend any minute. There were few electric lights to soften the dark of the night around the borders of the property. The staff jumped into action, lighting torches and candles on the tables. Since there were few customers yet, Holly seized the chance to approach her head chef. She and Byron had inherited her from the restaurant's previous owner, who had described her as Samira Chetrit, the fiery Moroccan woman. Samira was alone in the kitchen, prepping for the dinner crowd. Holly went in and held up a bottle of her bartender Fabienne's green flash hot sauce. "Look at this, Samira. Fabienne is making them. See the label? She makes every single one different and by hand. Cute, right?" Samira pursed her lips. Her eyebrows shot up toward the sky. Holly's psychology background came in handy when working with this particular employee. She folded her arms and waited patiently. It took some time, but Samira eventually shrugged in begrudging agreement. Yes, the bottle was cute, but she wasn't happy about it. Holly could feel her anger radiating off her in waves. "Well, I like the product," Holly said. "So does Byron. We're going to carry it in the gift shop and put one out on every table." Samira sucked in her bronze cheeks, which made her already full lips protrude even more. "Anyone can make hot sauce. If that's what you wanted, you should have told me." Holly remained silent to give Samira the idea that she was considering the notion, but her brows were furrowed as she did so. After a few respectful seconds, she made direct eye contact with the chef. "I didn't think of it before. I'm sure you make a great sauce. But it's not only what's in this bottle, it's the artwork and presentation. Byron and I have asked Fabienne to consider doing a painting for us, too. We think she's quite gifted." "As you wish." Samira screwed up her face. "I do think Haitian art is much overrated. Oof." Oh boy, here we go. Holly's feelings had cooled toward Samira since the night she drunkenly held forth on the subject of America's first black president. With a sniff, she'd referred to President Obama as that African, her eyes meeting Holly's in challenge. When she heard this, Holly shook her head like she was trying to get something out of her ear. "He's not African. He was born in the United States." Samira waved her hand derisively in the air. "He doesn't come from America. You know exactly what I mean." Holly assumed the woman was trying to say she believed the unfounded rumor that the president was born in Kenya, but she played dumb. "Actually, I don't have any idea what you mean." "He only became president because he was black," Samira slurred. "They wanted him in." What was she trying to prove? Holly was seriously upset by Samira's snobby facial expression and the certainty in her voice. She wasn't going to let it go. "Are you an American citizen? Do you have any idea of what you are talking about?" Holly wasn't actually sure what Samira's citizenship status was. She only knew that she had spent much of her life traveling all over the world. Samira swept her hands from near her face, down along the length of her torso. "I am Moroccan." Holly nodded. "I don't understand what you mean when you say, 'they wanted it.' Who is they?" "Oh, please." The chef tugged off her white toque and threw it to the floor. Holly stood up off her bar stool with her arms crossed and faced her. "Since you aren't from the United States, you don't get a say about who we vote into office. And just for the record, our former president is a self-made man from humble beginnings. We put a lot of stock in that where I come from. He worked his way up the ladder until he was elected editor at the Harvard Law Review. Do you know how few get that honor? Barack graduated magna cum laude from Harvard." Samira jerked her head up, so forcefully and in such a wobbly manner that Holly thought it was possible she might fall out of her seat. "Barack?" she snapped. "Do you know him?" "No, of course I don't know him," Holly said. "But I feel like I do. I'm really proud of him." "Why am I arguing with a drunk?" she asked herself, and then immediately answered the question. "Because I don't want her out in the world spreading this nonsense." "You misunderstand me, Holly," Samira said. "I have nothing against Africans. In fact, I rather enjoy them." She raised her eyebrows and wiggled them with a knowing look. "But for president?" Holly was offended by both Samira's sexual insinuation and her rant in general. But the next day, during a scheduled meeting to review food orders, Samira didn't seem to remember the conversation. Holly asked her about it, and she dismissed her rantings with an imperial wave of her hand. "I had too much to drink. This job is a lot of pressure. Every now and then, I need to blow off some steam." "Samira, you called President Obama an African in a way that sounded like an epithet." "It's how we do it where I come from," she said with a sniff. "Morocco is in Africa too. You are an African." "In the north, very far north. It is not the same thing." Holly sighed, as by then she'd already learned that she couldn't change Samira's mind once she dug in. Holly wasn't about to let the discussion about Fabienne's artwork and her hot sauce go the same way as many of her conversations with Samira had in the past. "This is a direction that Byron and I have decided to go in," she told her firmly. "We hope you'll support our decision. Frankly, this is a way for Fabienne to make extra money, and I'd like her to have the chance." Samira put both her hands on her slim hips. She always wore platform sandals, which Holly assumed was because she was only about 5 feet 2 inches tall. Her long black hair was tucked into her white hat, which framed dark eyes that were currently flashing with anger. "I am the head chef of this restaurant. I could work anywhere in the Caribbean because everyone enjoys my food. So I think you should consider this. It is I who am the creative force behind your success, not Fabienne. When you hold her up to our customers, you push down their opinion of me." Holly took in a sharp breath through her nose. Getting another chef would be difficult. I haven't heard of a qualified belonger who is available at the moment. This woman grates on my nerves, but I have to be practical. She knew that bringing an outside employee into the country could take months. The British government, which ran the territory of Turks and Caicos, made employers go through a lengthy process to do something like that. That long a wait could close the restaurant down. She cupped her chin between her thumb and forefinger. "We disagree, Samira," she said carefully. "Byron and I are proud of both you and Fabienne and the talents you've contributed to our success." She braced herself, expecting an argument, but then she realized she'd abruptly lost Samira's attention. The chef was turned away from Holly and peering out toward the sea. Holly pivoted in the same direction and heard the roaring sound that had apparently distracted Samira. A faint glow from under the horizon illuminated a shadowy shape moving on the surface of the water toward them, a rather large fishing boat from what Holly could make out. She squinted her eyes to help her focus, and then immediately rolled them. She thought she knew who was heading into shore, and she wasn't happy about it. As she craned her neck, she realized she was holding her breath too. The engine died back. Sounds of splashing drifted toward them, laughter. "Oh, shoot," a man hollered. "Land ahoy!" another voice called, sounding inebriated. There was bawdy laughter. Then she heard the first voice say, "Been single for 48 years, never married. A fact I am very proud of." Just as I thought. It's Lord Anthony Bascombe. Entitled bastard. Chapter 3. As Holly let out a sigh of exasperation, Samira's face opened up into a huge smile, showing off her almost perfect teeth. She untied her apron, lifted it up over her head, and ran toward the bathroom. Holly had seen her do this before. She would go overboard checking her hair and applying some makeup. The boat puttered closer. Since purchasing the sand dollar, Holly had had many such invasions by Anthony Bascombe, a man of dubious royalty and reputation. Him and his ever-changing, unsettlingly young companions. With a groan, she awaited the impact of his arrival. Samira returned from her primping session and stood beside Holly patiently. Holly had to admit her chef looked radiant. She'd let down her black hair, allowing it to fall halfway to her waist in a shining cascade. She had also put on a bit of lipstick, and the contrast of the red against her skin made it appear to glow. Samira had also lined her eyes with black liner as dark as coal. They looked huge, and thrown a flowy light top over her black leggings that exposed plenty of her ample cleavage. "How do I look?" Samira asked. "Do you have any perfume I could borrow?" The woman was practically salivating. "Perfume? No." Holly's tone was decidedly edgy. "I don't even own any." As she took in her own rumpled cotton dress, she tried to smooth out the wrinkles as best as she could, but it left her feeling dissatisfied and frumpy. That kind of fragrance doesn't belong in a working kitchen anyway. Samira pouted. Holly had put her hair up in a top knot to keep the wind from blowing strands into her eyes. This hairstyle was rarely a choice for her at this time of night, as the salt breeze had inevitably encrusted every blonde tendril she had on her head and whipped it into an unruly mess by now. She usually made a joke out of it. "Beach hair, don't care." Samira sucked in her cheeks again and glanced down her nose at Holly. Uncertain as to what to make of the haughty expression, Holly chose to watch the near distance with a drink in her hand. Some clouds parted, and she could now make out the large boat. The moonlit outlines of two figures threw kayaks overboard onto the water, climbed down, and got into them. The sound of splashing paddles followed, and grew louder as they bridged the stretch into shore. Next to the Sand Dollar's decking was one of the most easily accessible beaches on the island. The two men arrived, pulled their small rigs up on the sand, and walked around to the restaurant's entrance. The gait of the guy on the right was familiar. Holly readied herself for the energy about to fill the room. The duo strode in like they owned the place. Holly noticed both Anthony and his friend wore black bathing suits doubling as shorts, and waterproof sandals, though their shirts were different. Anthony sported a collared knit shirt that looked expensive, while his companion wore an impressive Cuban-style button-down. Samira practically threw herself into Anthony's arms as he entered. As he embraced her, he tossed an amused smile over his shoulder to his friend, and then, like a character from an old Hollywood movie, bent her backward for a kiss. Although he pulled off a dramatic vignette, which he seemed to thoroughly enjoy, he only planted a loud smooch on her forehead instead of her lips. "You gorgeous girl," he said. "What are you cooking up for us tonight? I'm famished. When we are ready, perhaps you can give us one of everything. You decide, a chef's tasting." With that, he pulled her back up and gave her a playful push toward the kitchen. "But wait till later in the evening. Cocktails first. Priorities, you know. Then we are off on a walkabout." Samira seemed a bit baffled, and certainly furious, as she slunk back through the kitchen door. Anthony's attention now turned toward the bar. "Fabienne, my lovely," he exclaimed. "You are a shining example of the beauty of the women of Haiti. What shall I drink tonight, my darling?" She cast her eyes down, presumably embarrassed by the intimacy of his statement. But Holly couldn't help but notice she was smiling. It was a shy smile, but a smile nonetheless. "What are you liking, Mr. Anthony?" She scanned from him to the man accompanying him. Anthony held his hands high, like the conductor of an orchestra. "Oh dear, where are my manners? Fabienne?" He gestured to her, and then to the man by his side. "This is my dear friend James. We used to work together on the stock exchange in New York. What shall we have to drink, James?" Holly's eyes widened at the disclosure. How long did he live in New York? She rested her shoulder against the support pole nearest to her and listened closely. "I always say," James said loudly, "when in Rome." "So you have a rum punch. Excellent choice," Anthony said as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Fabienne, James will have a triple rum punch, but make mine a single neat with only 3 ice cubes. That's just enough to keep the drink cold without watering down the liquor." He turned to survey the room and caught sight of Holly. When he bowed at the waist like an actor at the end of a Broadway musical, she did the opposite and straightened up, not knowing whether to laugh or curtsy in response. As he arose, he nodded his head, gave her a 2-fingered salute, and called out, "Madame." She shrugged as if to ask, "Who, me?" Then countered his salutation by saying in a dry tone, "No, monsieur. Je suis une mademoiselle." She thought she was quite witty, putting together a sentence in French on the fly. For some reason, at this moment, she found it difficult to look directly at Anthony. The focus of his attention made her uneasy. Though there was nothing on her skirt, she reached down and brushed off an imaginary speck. He purposefully pointed to his forehead with his index finger. "J'ai oublié. Excusez." This got her attention, though he staggered a little from the effort the gesture took. He bowed again, though not as deeply this time, and, nodding his head, held her gaze. His eyes looked as if they were ablaze. Holly blushed. She was undone by his boldness. "I mean, I'm the third in line after Samira and Fabienne." She felt invisible back there in the corner, though the moonlight backlit everything with luminescence. At long last, Anthony broke eye contact, but as he turned away, she noticed that he was wearing a satisfied little grin. "He thinks he's God's gift to women. Lord help us all." She watched as he leaned over the bar and whispered something into Fabienne's ear. Whatever he said made her laugh so hard she covered her mouth with the palm of her hand. It only added to Holly's general irritation. She walked toward them with great authority in her steps. "I'm going to get some fresh air while it's still quiet, Fabienne. It feels a bit oppressive in here right now." Fabienne didn't react, and after a beat, Holly sighed. No one had heard a word she'd said. "And that, my dear," Anthony bellowed, "is one of the many reasons why I have never been married." As he'd intended, his comment caused an uproar. Holly charged down the short path outside and opened the gate leading to the street. She slammed it behind her with as much power as she could muster, then headed toward Roseate, across the lane, and unlatched the second gate. It's a perfect time to get some paperwork done. Despite what Anthony said to Samira, he's too cheap to stay for dinner. They'll probably wander down to the food truck when they get hungry. I'll pay some bills here, and he'll be gone when I go back. Byron was at his desk in their shared office when she sat down at hers. He was working on something so intently that he didn't even look up. His concentration afforded her a moment to admire her son and how handsome he was. She never ceased to be amazed by it. Though everyone said he looked like his father, she knew he had her eyes. They were the exact same shape, though a different color. The large room they sat in was in the front corner of the building facing the road. A powerful, cool ocean breeze blew through the windows at this time of night, and the location allowed them to watch, and often hear, the comings and goings at the restaurant. Byron glanced up from what he was doing. "How are you doing, honey?" Holly asked. "Are you going to eat something?" The color of his skin changed from a rich brown to a glowing gold as it stretched over his high cheekbones and neared his green eyes. When he sat back in his antique desk chair, it creaked. "Sure. Finish what you came in here to do, and then we'll go over and have dinner. What's Samira's special tonight?" "The fishermen were flush with lobster today. She's made it 2 different ways." Holly stuck a pencil in her battery-operated sharpener. After it whirred for a few seconds, she removed the pencil and blew flecks of sawdust off the point. "What are you working on? You want some help?" She could hear his long exhale. "Mom. And Dad, too. Do either of you ever consider that I actually have a degree in business? Why do you always assume I don't know what I'm doing?" "Oh." She hadn't realized. But is that really fair? He's still so young. Her eyes watered, and he caught it. "What a life we lead," he said with a laugh, his annoyance gone. "We think nothing of eating lobster while we sit on the edge of the ocean." She was relieved the moment had passed, so much so that she chortled gleefully. "Don't think I ever take living here for granted. I want to sit for a few minutes and write some checks. Just long enough so I can be sure Anthony and his henchmen have left before we go over there." She put the pencil behind her ear for safekeeping. As she sharpened a second pencil, she noticed Byron could barely contain his urge to tease her. When she blew at the sawdust, he declared, "Anthony's harmless, Mom. I don't know why you let him bother you so much." "I don't understand it myself." "He's a blowhard," she stammered, "and he's always hanging out in my restaurant, flirting with the girls." "And spending good money." His eyes were crinkled with amusement. "Not as much as he could," she snapped. Byron snorted. "No matter what I say, he's going to laugh at me," she thought, flushing. She was still holding the pencil point up in the air. She turned it 180 degrees and blew the shavings on the other side off. Only then did she turn to Byron. She found it hard to spit the right words out. "It's his hair." Finally, I said it out loud. It looked like she was explaining her opinion to the graphite point. Holly bobbled her head at Byron with comically wide eyes. "You know exactly what I mean." She stuck out her tongue for good measure. Byron bent over, guffawing. He couldn't seem to stop shaking his head. "That was the last thing I thought you were going to say." He was collapsed so far over the desk that he was talking into his lap. She was rattled. How could she explain herself? It did sound silly. "It's far too long for a man his age. Does he think he's in a glam band from the 80s? And all those different colored highlights? He must go to Providenciales to have it done. The gas alone must cost a fortune." "The gas?" That set Byron off again. He was slapping his leg. At one point, he actually hooted. "Okay, well, Mom, of all the things to worry about." Now he was wiping at the tears streaming down his face. Holly's lips pursed. "I don't know what you find so hilarious. You never saw anyone like that back home in Vermont, a grown man dyeing his hair?" He was holding his belly now. "I'll admit it's over the top, but he's not hurting anyone. This island draws idiosyncratic types. From what I can tell, the whole Caribbean does." He pulled a tissue out of its box and finished wiping his face. But when he looked her directly in her eyes, he cracked up again. Apparently, he was struggling to get control of himself. He turned away and started busying himself with items on his desk. He sounded quite reasonable when he said, "I guess we all have our things that set us off. I know I do." But when he looked up and met his mother's eyes, he lost it again. She threw her hands in the air. "I'm sorry," he said, but compared to other character flaws, it seems so harmless. Maybe one of his girlfriends is a hairdresser and she got carried away, you know? A few drinks and things got out of hand. That's another thing, now that you brought it up. Why is he running around with girls half his age? Her face was flushed already. When Byron answered, "Because he can," she thought her head would burst. "I can see you feel differently. He just bothers me, okay? Like how you can't stand the sight of any beverage this red. You're not perfect either, mister." His smile faded and his posture straightened. He clearly understood that it was time to change the subject. He paused to gather his papers together and tap the bottom of the stack against the desktop. Once the documents were righted, he put them in a blue folder. Then he cleared his throat. "On another much more important matter, the band will be setting up soon." "Mark my words," Holly continued on as if Byron had just confirmed he shared her contempt for Anthony. "He will walk down the street to eat a sandwich at the snack bar and then saunter back to listen to our music. Cheap bastard." He shook his head, though ever so slightly. "People are free to come and go on this island. There's nothing we can do about it. He likes to go place to place and visit, to say hello to everyone." Holly didn't even bother to answer him. They worked in a tense silence under the golden lights of their green glass desk lamps until a very old cuckoo clock struck 7 o'clock. When it quieted down, they both heard Byron's stomach growl and laughed. He swiveled his chair sharply and stood up. "That's enough work for today. Let's head over." Yes, Holly thought. Time for a drink.